end for us to share the thoughts on those questions. So I'm going to share my screen and jump into, I think I have 7 or 8 slides that I'm going to share with you. Hopefully everyone can see my screen, and start with a little bit of an overview. If I'm locking myself, here we go. And really, as Laura said, Lower Merion and Haverford share the use of the polo fields, and that's gone back for decades and decades. The Lower Merion School District, the plan that's proposed is to use the polo fields for the new middle school baseball and softball teams beginning in spring of 2024. So we're a little more than 2 years out from the proposed use of these fields. And really what's important to note is the use of baseball and softball, the fields after school, is nothing new. That's something that's been happening in the polo field for years. And I'll get into that a little bit later, that there really is no change in the usage after school, other than the uniforms on the children who are using the fields. It will have no impact to night or weekend use. There's no proposal here for nights, weekends. And really what we want to do, and the whole purpose of having this meeting, is to have our 2 townships work together, because we do kind of work together on the polo fields to inform the neighbors and understand your needs regarding not only this use, but the polo fields in general. We thought this would be a good time to kind of broaden that discussion about the polo fields. So just want to start with the new middle school, so that you may or may not know, Lower Merion has seen some real big enrollment growth in recent years, and is building a new 1,200 person middle school at 1860 Montgomery Avenue in Villanova. If you go up Montgomery Avenue towards King of Prussia, up to South Gulf Road, you'll see there's a big hill and a big construction site. That's where the new middle school is going. And unfortunately, and this was known going in, the site itself there's insufficient site for all of the fields that are needed. And you can see from this poorly pixelated picture of the blueprint, there is at the bottom half, there is a multi-purpose field with a track around it. There's another next to that, a half of practice field. But with the site, it is a big site, but it is not big enough to house all of the fields that are needed. It's also a hilly site. So unfortunately, on the grounds of the campus, and it's not unique to this middle school, that all of the needs for the interscholastic sports cannot be handled on the site itself. There is a need for an off-site baseball field, an off-site softball field, and 2 additional multi-purpose fields. And the Lower Merion School District purchased property kind of, I don't want to say across the street, relatively close to the Lower Merion Middle School, to place these fields. And this was the plan that was proposed by the school district. It is incredibly messy, as you see, and that's because on this site are about 500 trees, as well as 3 historic buildings on the site. To get the fields in here, which would include a baseball field, a softball field, 2 multi-purpose fields, and two half practice fields as well, that would all have to be clear cut. And when that was presented to the township did not approve these plans. So this plan has not moved forward. There's some potential litigation over this plan, but as of right now, this plan has not been approved. And so in the alternative, we've had an exhaustive search for alternative fields, because we know for the new school that there is a need for interscholastic sports, and there's a need for fields for these interscholastic sports. And there has been probably, I would say easily 1.5 to 2 years, if not longer, of searching for additional fields, and ultimately led to the polo fields. But what's important, led to the polo field for baseball and softball. There's not an intention to build a sport complex here. I talked before about multi-purpose field needs. There are certainly soccer fields at the polo field, That is not part of the plan. There's no intention to use those fields for the middle school. It is really to use just the baseball, softball component. And I'll get into why that is in a second. But really the rationale for the polo field was that it is about 10 minutes from the new middle school. Fields are already in existence, so you would not need to cut down trees. And I know in Lower Merion Township, and I know as well in Haverford Township, the focus on sustainability is very important. And the idea of cutting down 500 old growth trees is not ideal for either township or frankly anyone in the region. So having fields that are already in existence was certainly something that we were looking for. It's important to note that this plan will not increase the intensity of usage of the middle school fields. I said earlier that really the biggest change that residents will see is a change in the uniforms on the backs of the children. Currently, the fields are used after school by Shipley and St. John Coleman Newman for their baseball and softball teams. Those private schools would be using other fields, and in their place, the middle school would be going in there. And in fact, we worked with Donna, who you saw on the screen before, our director of Parks and Rec, who does a lot of the scheduling. And the middle school would actually have fewer games than those schools on the field. So there will be practice after school, but in terms of games and spectators coming to the games, it would actually be a decrease in the usage from what we currently see. There's not a plan to put in additional fields. There's not a plan to add on intensity at all. It's really keeping it as is. It's just a different school using those fields. The next bullet point here is about opportunity for improvements to space. I know as we've heard from some of the neighbors, we're always looking to improve our open spaces. And with this use is we're looking at and part of the reason we want to have this call is to hear from you on what are the things that you really like about the polo fields, and we want to make sure don't change with this use or any other use, and where are the areas for improvement and you would like to see, whether it's more buffering with trees. I know there were some plans for a walking path around around the entire polo field. Where are those opportunities to improve this space? And I do want to reiterate, this is a partial solution. This is not not to be used for the multi-purpose. It's really only for the baseball and softball needs. As Laura said in her introduction, the polo field is shared by the townships. We have an agreement where we jointly manage the polo field, maintenance, grass cutting, trash collection, capital improvements, all the rules and regulations and permitting. When it was originally donated to the townships, it was given to keep it simple, it was given to an association which incorporated both townships, and both townships together for decades have been using the fields and working together. And giant kudos to Donna and Brian. This is a very unusual arrangement to have two separate municipalities on an open space and working together. And through the years, they have done an incredible job working together and really having great flexibility and great respect for each other in managing this space and making sure it's available for both townships, and it's a great open space for everyone who uses it. And I want to make clear that there are some things that will change and that won't change. Again, this wouldn't start until April 2024, and part of the reason we're here 2 years out is because we want to make sure that things aren't getting rushed through, things aren't done hastily, and the concerns of the neighbors, just like in my ward when they're building the middle school, we want to make sure that the neighbors' concerns are being addressed, and we have plenty of time to address them and really create a plan that works for everybody. So we're over 2 years out. The other thing, as I said, we're talking about after school use, and really it's during the school baseball, softball season, which is just the months of April and May. So it's about an 8, maybe a 9 week period where the new middle school would use the baseball fields and the softball fields instead of the two private schools I mentioned. Talking usage Monday to Friday afternoons. Adult groups and other groups currently are permitted for the fields after the after school use, and that would stay the same. Weekends would stay the same. This really has no impact on that. As I said before, we're talking about fewer games and more practices. The one change that we may see in transportation is the school district we know uses kind of big yellow school buses to get the children there. Sometimes the middle schools, or I'm sorry, the current schools that use the fields use vans instead of buses. Some of the visiting teams that come use the buses. So you do currently see buses coming to Polo Field for the games. But it's a mix of vans and buses, and I think we'd probably see fewer buses rather than more vans. And then the question is, how do they access the fields? Because for those of you who are familiar with the Polo Field, the driveway into the parking lot is a very narrow driveway, and the school district would not be comfortable bringing buses into that driveway as currently configured. So may need Railroad Avenue. Something we'd have to figure out is that bus access to the fields. Just again, to reiterate, we're not talking about any impact on evening or weekend use of the fields. The maintenance will stay at a high level. I know the school district takes very good care of their fields and would want, if they're using these fields, to make sure that the fields are of the highest quality. Something that I know both of our Parks and Recs departments also feel very strongly about. And one thing that's important, and we've seen this fight elsewhere in Lower Merion, there is zero intention, plan, ability for lights or sound systems. This goal is not to create, again, not to create a sports complex, not to create a stadium, not to change what we currently have in the open space that all of us love by putting in lights or putting in sound systems. The school district or any other user of these fields would not have the right or ability to force that in here, and neither township has any interest in doing that either. So that's not part of any plan whatsoever. So I did a lot of talking. I promised I'd keep it as short as I could. My last slide is really about questions and concerns, and at this point I'd want to turn it over to Laura with any questions. I'm going to stop sharing and happy to have any of us answer any questions that come up.
Okay, thank you, Andy. So we're going to kick it off. One of the many unique things about Brentford is its really active civic association. So I want to thank them for joining us tonight and for taking the time to work with the neighbors and coordinate concerns as a group. So I'm going to ask three of them to represent the civic and begin with the first questions for this portion of the forum, and then you can raise your hands after that. That'll be Kathy Case, Gail Farrelly-Semerad, who's president of the civic, and Gail Lovett. We've reserved 1 hour for the meeting, and so we hope we can cover as many questions as possible. But we do ask during the Q&A portion of the meeting that you limit your comments to 2 minutes so that everyone may have a chance to share. Thanks again for coming.
Thank you, Laura. My name is Dr. Gail Farrelly-Semerad, and I'm the president of the Brentford Civic Association. I want to thank you for your presentation. It was very informative. We always have questions, right? So one of the things that I just want to share with you is that I am a lifelong resident. I grew up here, and then when my mom passed away, I bought the house. So I brought back my children to enjoy the polo field. So it's near and dear to my heart. Many of the board members actually live within, right around the polo field that you're going to be hearing from today. We do have, kind of 4 major concerns that you did touch on some of them, and thank you so much for laying them out in your presentation. Concern about extent of usage, transportation and parking, maintenance and safety. There are major concerns that we came up with a lot of questions about. You're going to hear from a couple of board members tonight. You're going to hear from Doreen Sarr, who's our treasurer, who actually lives on Rugby. So she is near that Railroad Avenue area that you talked about in regard to buses. So there definitely is a concern about the buses and the parking and the traffic and also the safety of the children in regard to that. You're going to also hear from Jake Swan, who is our vice president, and he is very familiar with field maintenance and things like that, very active in the soccer association, even though you did mention that we're not touching the soccer fields. And you're also going to hear from Kathy Case and Gail Lovett, who are our co-chairs. At Brentford Civic Association, we actually have a committee dedicated to the polo field, as we do for Preston Field. Our fields are extremely important to our Civic Association, as you mentioned how important they are in general. So Kathy Case is a 43-year resident. Her property is on County Line Road and backs up to the polo field, and Gail Lovett lives on Dayton Road, and the same where her house backs up to the polo field. So I'm just going to turn over the Q&A, starting with Kathy and Gail. And thank you so much, gentlemen and ladies, for your attention.
Thank you.
So this is for Gail Lovett now, correct?
I thought it was Kathy first.
I can't
Kathy.
find Kathy on the list.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll tell you something. My question, I grew up in Lower Merion, and I had the benefit of the Merion Botanical Gardens, beautiful park. I played in other parks all around Lower Merion, and for the life of me, I can't figure out why you're not using your own parks for this. You have Gladwin Park that has ball fields, soccer fields. It's 1 minute longer to get there. I would like to know why you're not using your own parks.
I think that's a very fair question, and the simple answer is there's not availability. We currently, all of our schools go off-site for at least one of the sports. So I know and Donna, if I'm speaking out of turn, please correct me, but I know, Harridan High School uses the baseball field over at Gladwin Park. The reason that we are not looking to increase the intensity of usage at Polo Field for, field hockey and lacrosse and soccer is because we can use our own parks, the ones that are wholly within Lower Merion, for those sports. There's just not the availability of the baseball and softball fields within the parks that are wholly within Lower Merion. And Donna, correct me if I'm wrong on any of that.
You're correct. All after school use times are booked by our school district. They even our high school, Lower Merion High School, has South Ardmore as their home baseball field.
My other question is, besides the trees, why are your township residents fighting this so much for their own children?
So I can't speak for all of our residents, nor would I want to, but I know that the fight isn't that we shouldn't have interscholastic sports. The fight
I know.
Yeah. It's what's the right place. And this, originally the school district had looked at Stoneleigh, and I don't know if anyone has been to Stoneleigh. It is this incredible
Well, that was inappropriate.
resource.
Yeah.
And it's right next door to the property that they had bought, which was originally part of Stoneleigh. It's a magnificent, this property, which is next door to Stoneleigh, is just as magnificent of a property as Stoneleigh. And it has this, huge tree canopy. It has these historic buildings. And, a lot of people within the township have said, this is not, it's not right to clear cut this entire property, both in terms of the trees and the buildings, to build fields there. And
Well, you looked at other properties on Spring Mill Road, and why was that kiboshed?
The school district, before they went to that property, went to a property on Spring Mill Road. It had wetlands that they got an agreement for the property, but during their due diligence period, realized that they could not build fields there due to the wetlands on the fields or on the property, and that kind of eliminated that property, unfortunately.
Okay.
We've tried, believe me, we have spent, I've spent hours and hours of going through private properties, public properties, everything we can. And I think we're using Gladwin potentially for some of the multi-purpose fields limits the need, and we're trying to really limit what our need is as much as possible. And that's where we ended up coming up with this potential solution.
I've met with Brian and Scott and Donna and Eileen, along with Andy Lewis, many times about the care of the field. We have those wonderful water lines. They've never been used. They say, oh, they're too difficult to use. But when I've gone down to the Richie Ashburn Park, they're used down there beautifully for taking care of the field. And of course, I'm not addressing that, but it is a concern, is I have met about the care of the field. And maybe like Jake will take that over. See here.
Donna, could you comment for just a moment on the use of the dedicated water line at Polo?
Yeah, we have used the water cannons and the water line at Polo. It hasn't been super frequent, but we have utilized them. We utilize them in any kind of drought situation or when we have to do some maintenance activities.
Okay. And how do you use them? Oh, never mind. I won't do this. So is Jacob on? Do you have him on to take over from here? How about Doreen Sarr?
Are you talking about Jake Swan?
Yes.
We'll be with you in a moment.
Wonderful. Can you
Speak
guys hear
away.
me now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, great. I just want to say one thing about Kathy Case. I think she's listed under the name Jacques.
I got it. Thank
You got
you.
it. Okay, great.
Yep.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say a couple things about maintenance and how the fields will be cared for and cleaned up. Currently, it feels like the fields are overused and slightly under-maintained, just relative to other facilities in both townships. And we are wondering if the maintenance plan would change with this new proposal from the Lower Merion School District. This has to do with, first and foremost, the fields themselves. They are, on weekends at least, you have, sometimes 10 games per field each weekend. In the weeks, during the weekdays, I assume they're also quite actively used. The second concern would be toilets for kids who are going to be there for several hours after school. How is that going to work? Currently, I think there are 1 or 2 chemical toilets on the site. Who's going to be installing them? Who's going to be maintaining them? Where are they going to be located? They have been located on the wrong side of the parking lot for a long time, meaning kids were running across parking lots to get to the facilities. So that's another question. And the last question would have to do with trash management, things like that. On the weekends, the fields get trashed. There's all sorts of debris left from games and practices, and just concerned about who would be taking care of that. Would it be the school district? Would it be the township, Lower Merion, Haverford? How would all of that work?
So I'll leave this to either Brian or Donna. What I can say is the school district is not going to be planning to use the fields on the weekends. So I don't see them as having any role in that. But Brian or Donna, if you want to take this question.
Sure, Brian, I can start and you can add whatever you feel is necessary. With regards to field maintenance, if the school district was on the way they operate in our parks, they also add some additional maintenance as well as some preventative maintenance to our fields, including growth blankets over the winter to enhance turf management. We do have Polo on a turf management schedule now. We completed some soil testing and soil amendments over the last few years during COVID to start bringing back some of the turf grasses versus the ground cover or broadleaf weeds that can crop up when there is bare soil. As far as the toilets, we've had various iterations of locations on the Porta Johns. They do need to be accessible for maintenance purposes. They also need to be on a very stable surface because unfortunately people like to tip them with or without people in them. And then on the trash side, we've gone round and round. Basically, Lower Merion picks up the trash on site for the fields, not on the playground side. We have nailed down the actual trash can pickup. We do continue to struggle with groups, Lower Merion Soccer, Haverford Soccer, Lower Merion Little League, all the various groups that utilize the fields as far as what they may leave behind. And that's a conversation that we're going to continue. We need to continue to do that with the permit holders and make sure that they are following up and picking up after their use each and every time.
And just to add to what Donna had said, our experience is that when school district uses Haverford Township School District uses Haverford Township fields, that they are able to provide more maintenance, more care, and spend more time on the fields than we have the resources to do. So that is a plus. We have school district using a few of our fields that, they really spend some time on there, making the fields look good. In reference to the bathrooms, the locations of the porta potties, we have one at one end, so it's near the soccer fields, and one at the other end of the parking lot, so it's near the baseball field. So the idea is that the close enough to the area so nobody should need to cross the parking lot to get to it. But we can look at that issue. Bathrooms and parks are always a challenge. And as Donna said, we've tried many iterations of where best to put those. So that's always something that we could look at again and deal with. In reference to the use of the fields, Polo field is not used any differently than any other field that we permit on weekends. Obviously, that's prime time for soccer games and lacrosse games and other activities, spring and fall. And as I have said to some of the residents' concerns before, it's not like if we don't permit the field that no one's going to show up and use it. So we find that when we permit groups, we have more control of dealing with the trash issues, dealing with any other issues that come up because we know who's using the field. And if we don't permit it during prime time, someone will use it. Someone's going to use it. So it's not like if we say, oh, we're going to permit it less, that it's going to be used less. That just isn't what our experience is. So that's what I would say as far as use is concerned. And as far as trash, trash on weekends is always a challenge because there's so much more trash generated because the fields are used longer because kids aren't in school and there's more use. We do a Saturday pickup at our parks, but it's mostly, I think, the field use that gets a more trash issue, and trash is something we battle at most of our parks because of the volume on the weekend. So it is something I think we can address and manage. And it's something that we would look into in cooperation with Lower Merion.
Great. There's another question, another hand raised. Gail Farrelly Simmerod again has her hand up. I don't know if you need to speak, Gail.
Yeah, Dave, it was just, I wanted to point out that Kathy Case was.
Oh, I got her. Good.
Yeah, so
Thank you.
That's all I needed. Thanks.
All right, so let's see here. I've asked Kathy to speak. Let's see if she.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, I don't know what. So I have some questions about usage. You have said that the middle school grades, there are 4 grades, is my understanding, 5th through 8th, which is somewhat different from other middle schools. And that none of the baseball will be played on the land you acquired with the trees. That will not have any baseball fields as it currently stands. Is that correct? I can't hear.
She's muted.
You're muted, Andy.
Sorry, I just realized that. I apologize. Not exactly true. We are still, nothing has been finalized at this point. The original plan submitted by the school district to the township had baseball, softball there. That is really the baseball and the softball is what's creating a lot of the problems in terms of the trees, because those are such big land uses. There is a possibility that, if baseball and softball is moved off of that site, that there still could be the opportunity to put multi-purpose fields on those sites without the need to cut down the trees. So those sites may still be, that site may still be used for some of the other fields, even, with this plan as well.
So how many students are we actually talking about in the 4 grades?
So the total middle school is 1,200 students. The interscholastic sports, however, are only 7th and 8th grades. So 5th and 6th grades do not play interscholastic sports. So they're not part of the equation here.
So only the 7th and 8th graders would be using the polo field.
Correct. I mean,
So-
for this use, yeah.
So, and this would be every day after school for 2 months, 5 days a week.
Other than days where it's rain, days where, if there's an away game, something like that, it wouldn't be used, but it's essentially, yeah, those 2 months for after school use, correct?
Now, as someone said earlier, I live right next to the field. I look right at one of those, the softball field, I believe. And I can assure you, it is not used every day after school. Shipley and St. John probably don't have the same number of students that you do, but I can't imagine that they use it every day after school, and maybe leased out to others. But our problem is, as neighbors of the polo field, we have no idea who uses the field. We've asked for many years to get a list of who's renting the field so that we can see. I've been here for 42 years, and I can say that fields have been added, usage has gone up, the traffic goes up. There are 50 or more houses who abut the polo field. So it's not like we're out in a rural area that's not congested. There are cars, increasing number of cars on all of those streets. County line in the mornings is backed up all the way. It never used to be. So the use of the field has escalated over time. As Brian said, yes, some people come and use it unauthorized. They're not supposed to. It's against the rules of both townships to play on a field without a permit, as far as I know, but that doesn't mean if normal people don't show up. Adult teams show up. Some of them lease the field, some of them just show up, some have picnics. There's everything you can describe happening on the polo field. To say that it's exactly the same usage as it's always been isn't really accurate, because we have no idea what it's always been. It's just every year it increases. And it would mean there are only 2 fields on this. There's a softball field and a baseball field. If middle school uses them every day after school, no one else will be able to in those months. So it basically precludes any use by Haverford Township whatsoever of those ball fields on those days for those months. That's not equal sharing of the field in the view of most of the neighbors. The other thing, and I think Doreen will talk about this, is the traffic. The road into the polo field, and as you know, the polo field is privately owned. It's owned by the Playfield Association. It is leased to these 2 townships. The road into it has been the same going back to 1895, actually. But when this whole setup was done in 1944, nobody was playing the game they're playing now. Little League started in 39, I believe. And baseball was pretty much it. There weren't soccer fields. Nobody was playing much lacrosse. And there was, in fact, a polo grounds, a house, stables, and a stadium on this field. So we're looking at usages that evolved since for the past 75 years, each of them increasing. 2 fields have been added down toward Railroad Avenue that were not there 10 years ago, I think. They're soccer fields. So and on weekends, it's a zoo. There's not enough place to park. They park along the road. Our neighbor Joe Durazio, who's building 3 houses right near the entrance to the Polo Field Road, and incidentally is the only one who has a right of way off that road, other than the playfield itself. They park all along that road and anywhere else. And there is parking on County Line. Sometimes people take advantage of it. There is no parking on Railroad. It's been posted. So the traffic is a concern. The noise is a concern. It's hard to believe there's, that Lower Merion Middle School would have substantially more students than Shipley. They aren't there every day, 5 days a week. Neither is St. John Newman. And I don't know who else rents it because we don't have access to that information, but I'm sure that Dave and Brian could put it together. However, it was my understanding that it was Lower Merion that kept a list of who uses the field. So our problem is hearing there's going to be no increase in usage without a baseline to compare it to. We don't know. So, and that's why the neighborhood is rather skeptical, I'd say, about every time we've said there's going to be no increase in usage. And it's sort of like saying there'll never be an increase in traffic. Well, that's just, those things aren't true. Those of us who abut the field put up with the noise and confusion because we knew it when we bought our houses that there was a field here. But it was a quiet, gentle little field for decades. Now it's not. And so our concern is any change in the use of the field is going to affect our neighborhood substantially, particularly one that essentially would preclude anyone from Haverford Township being able to use the field, the baseball fields in those days. That's not an equal sharing of the field. So perhaps you could address it in terms of numbers, if it's only the 7th and 8th grade, and they'll be here every day, 2 grades playing baseball or softball every day after school.
So Kathy, thank you for that. And my understanding is the number of students at the school is relatively irrelevant. Whether it's a private school or a public school, they would have, 1 team. And where it does become relevant is, will the school field a team, for the year? And my understanding, and I may be wrong, is at least for the foreseeable past. And if I said, and I apologize, if I had said that, this is the same use that it's always been, that was certainly me misspeaking, and I apologize about that. I'm talking about kind of from where we are currently, and that's also tricky. As everyone knows, we've gone through the COVID pandemic over the past 2 years. School has been virtual. Athletics have been, not interscholastic athletics have not been happening over the past 2 years. So it is a little hard to compare the last 2 years, but going back to where we were before the pandemic and where we've seen, in the years before that, this use is comparable. From talking with Donna and Brian, this use is comparable to how Shipley and St. John Coleman Newman use the fields. Really, when they're permitted for those schools, no one else is using those fields, nor can they. I know for 2022, this coming up spring, my understanding is the thought is, a total of over 20 home games during those 40 days, with practices sprinkled in and other groups using the fields as well. And again, I know you had talked a little bit about the overuse on weekends. This really has no impact on that, and that's certainly a question and something that both townships can look into together. But in terms of how the middle school impacts that, the middle school is not impacting the weekend use or the nighttime use. So I hope that helps to a degree. I don't know if Donna, you want to add anything about the use of the fields, because you certainly are a lot closer to it than I am, and how they're used currently, or I guess pre-pandemic, how they were used after school may be helpful for the people on this call.
Yeah, I think you really touched on it, that basically Shipley uses it for games. So they schedule their games there. St. Newman it uses it for practice as well as games in a CYO setting. So their games get rescheduled, hit or miss. Depends on whether the other CYO team can actually get there. So that there may have been some different gaps of usage. I think the same would occur with a middle school use, where they won't practice literally every day, Monday through Friday. High school teams don't even practice Monday through Friday, although many coaches would like them to. So I believe the intensity of use at the middle school level would allow for that after school time to have times when there are no teams on those two baseball fields, especially when they're away games, but also just giving them a break. They are middle schoolers and they don't need to practice every day.
Brian and Donna, do you want to comment on the information about what groups have permitted the fields? Because this is something we talked about with Laura when the three of us were speaking. And, I think that we've heard from Kathy just now that neighbors don't necessarily know what groups, what teams have been permitted at a given time. So is it possible to communicate that information?
Yeah, and we obviously, between Lower Merion and Haverford, we share each year who's permitting what time, so we make sure there's no conflicts. So we do that. And Eileen might know better, and I know she's on this call, but we can definitely provide that information, no problem, once the permits are set for the spring, which should be sometime at the end of February, early March, and provide the list. I thought we had in the past, but maybe Kathy didn't get them. I don't know. But it's easy enough to do that and get that information. It's obviously on record because we have to know who's there and when they're there. And Donna does the same thing. And we definitely share that with each other. So it'd be no problem to share that information with the Civic Association, and then it could share it with any of their members that they choose to, because that's good information to have so the neighbors are aware what's going on.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, so the next speaker, and from here going forward, I'll try to limit those to 2 minutes as we discussed in the beginning, but is Doreen Czar, who is with the Civic Association. So I'm going to unmute Doreen now.
Can you hear me? I'm going to talk about the problem with parking. Clearly, one of the things that strikes me about this conversation is the total lack of planning. We cannot see going forward. This is a situation of traffic in without adding buses, which may idle as they wait to Railroad Avenue and spilling onto the adjoining streets. We already have a problem with the Haverford School spilling onto Millbrook, which has not been able to be solved. So we have a continuing problem. The buses are not an appropriate place. Railroad children walking across Railroad or even leaving the buses on Railroad can't happen. It's not allowed. Parking is not allowed there. People park illegally on the weekends all the time. So what we have, I think, is a situation that has not been thought through. And I have to ask, if in 2024, you already don't have fields for your existing schools, if the arc of population continues in Lower Merion, where will those new people go for their fields? So I find that if we don't look at this from a long-range planning point of view, and I think this usage really sort of does not take planning into consideration and does not take traffic into consideration. We are off Lancaster. Railroad is a cut-through street. We're right near Haverford Road. The buses will idle and make that situation worse. So you have really a catastrophe in the making. Now, what we need to do is to say, really, you have a use that will continue into the into the future, because there is no plan by Lower Merion to deal with these problems. So if you cannot locate these fields in your own township, it seems unfair to bring them to ours. The other question is transparency. And we've been asking for transparency about usage for years. We've been asking for this, and it seems odd that the residents are now involved in getting information about transparency, which has not been available to us in the past. So we cannot monitor, and we know that the usage is intense. I walk by the baseball fields all the time. They are not used regularly. We do not see buses and vans there. So I find that this is the township talking to townships and the townships not talking to their residents and really looking at the practical aspects of the situation.
So Doreen, thank you for that. But I think I take a little objection to when you say there's a total lack of planning. We are currently, 2 years out from any proposed use of the fields, and the whole purpose of having this meeting is to talk with the residents and to have this conversation and start this conversation. And whether if the bus is not being appropriate on railroad or creating problems, or it needs to be, the students getting there by van that can be used the parking lots. The reason we're doing this now rather than in December of 2023 is to give us the time to solve these problems. And we know getting the students there and minimizing any impact on traffic is certainly a big issue that needs to be worked out. And it's something that not only needs to be worked out, but also needs to be communicated with the residents. I live in the neighborhood that's adjacent to where the new middle school is. And these are conversations I'm having with my neighbors and things that impact me personally as well as my neighbors all the time. And whether it's the fields, whether it's a school, whether it's something else, at least my reason for wanting to have this meeting and working so closely with Laura and Scott and Dave and Brian is because it is, in my mind, very important to get the residents' input and to share plans and be as transparent as we can and have enough time to do this planning. So I won't say we have all the answers right now. I don't think anyone on this call can say we have all the answers, but this is the start of a process to get those answers and to do this in the right way. And that's really why we're doing this now. And so this is the start of a planning process and trying to do this as well as possible. And I don't view this as kind of taking Lower Merion's problem and offloading it to somebody else. This park, certainly it is in Haverford, and we certainly, absolutely, I know I can speak for Scott and myself, the respect we have for the neighbors of the park, whether they live in Lower Merion or Haverford. But this is a park that we both share. It's an asset of both townships and something that residents of both townships love and use and adore. And it certainly, no doubt, has a bigger impact on the Haverford neighbors because it is situated, in Haverford. And that's really why we're here. This is my 5th year as serving as a commissioner in Lower Merion. I have not, until this time, had a meeting with residents of another township. And I think it's important to do that. And I think, I want to praise Laura for doing that. And I think we all felt it was important that we all get together to solve this problem and come up with a solution that really minimizes any externalities and problems.
I just want to add a little bit, Doreen, your points are well taken. And I think, it's hard for me to say about planning in the past because I'm just getting started, but what I do think we have is an opportunity to address these changes that have happened in Brentford over the last decade or two. Population's been growing, traffic's been increasing. So I think this is a good time to do this, and hopefully we'll be able to address some of those concerns that you mentioned.
Thanks, Andy and Laura. If I could just add 2 points, I think all of us agree that buses that idle, oftentimes they shouldn't, and that's a very good point. And interestingly, the Lower Merion School District population has not gone up the last 2 school years. It has been level in the 2021 school year and the 21-22 school year, even though new capacity is being added with this new middle school. So it's not necessarily the case that it's going to keep going up.
Okay, our next speaker will be Jeff Weintraub.
Actually, I didn't really have a question. I was trying to figure out at the beginning why I didn't see myself on the screen. And I realized that most of the people participating here aren't on the screen. That's the only reason that I accidentally clicked on the hand up. I've been following the conversation, which is very informative. So I don't have anything to add to it. Thanks.
Thanks, Beth. That's the best. That's the winner. Best comment. Next one is going to be Roseanne McDougall.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, good. All right. You may have mentioned this, but I think you did very quickly and I didn't catch it. About these schools that currently use or recently have used the polo field, what's proposed that's going to happen to them, and are they agreeable to such a proposal?
Donna, can I pass this one to you as the master scheduler?
Yes, I will do my very best. We haven't opened that conversation just yet. We wanted to actually have the conversation with you as the residents and gather additional input. But as far as Shipley's requests for games only, we can try to intermingle them with some of our existing after-school activities to schedule their up to 14 home games per season. And I'm not really sure how best we can address St. Newman's with regards to what their exact needs would be, but we would open up that conversation once a determination or a direction has been determined.
Next question is Michelle Avery.
Hi, thank you. Just to let other people know here, I'm the chairman of the Parks and Recreation Board for Haverford Township, but I years ago worked for Lower Merion Township as the assistant director for recreation. So I'm very familiar with the shared facility and the history of it. And for those that don't necessarily see the scheduling, unfortunately, I do get to see some of the scheduling. It is a pretty fair 50-50 break between Haverford Township and Lower Merion Township. And when the time slots are allotted, it's up to each township to decide who gets to use it. And I totally comprehend that. I would just like to reiterate the concern that the last woman did of what's going to happen to both Shipley and St. Coleman John Newman, particularly St. Coleman John Newman is in Haverford Township. So I know that we're already pretty maxed out, but I guess the question would be for Eileen Matola if we have any place that we can move them to, because they're obviously going to need a facility and they're one of our township Catholic schools. So that would be my biggest concern is, Shipley's in Lower Merion, so Lower Merion would figure out what to do with them, but I would guess that we would have to figure out what to do with St. Coleman John Newman.
Either Eileen or Brian, I guess we'll take that because and Eileen, I think you're muted. Or your sound's not working.
I'll take it since Eileen might be having some technical difficulties. We would look to help them. I don't know offhand. As Donna described, sometimes we have shared usage of fields because, as a lot of the speakers have said, that a lot of these school groups aren't there every day, and we have some sharing arrangements at a number of our locations. So we would look into that. We have residency requirements for our permits. So my guess is the reason that St. John, Coleman John Newman went to Lower Merion is that they may had more Lower Merion residents at the time than Haverford residents. It's going back and forth. We have helped St. John Newman with field space in the past, but my guess is that's why they approached Lower Merion, because both of us have residency requirements, and it could be that at the present time they just have more residents in Lower Merion than they do in Haverford. So. But if they came to us, we would look to try to find field space for them. Obviously, 90-foot base path fields are limited in both communities, which is why we're here talking about this. But I think that we might be able to find some accommodation if they came to us.
And just to clarify, Brian, I think if I'm reading between the lines correctly, St. Coleman John Newman is being scheduled on Lower Merion time currently. And not to say that we shouldn't find fields for them, because we certainly should work to find fields for all of our schools, whether public or private, but they are within that 50% of Lower Merion time currently.
Correct.
All right, our next speaker is going to be Bill Mcmichael.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I've lived in the neighborhood now, I think 23 years. And in that time, the usage of the polo field has continued to increase, and the field's been reconfigured to expand it and increase the usage dramatically. And it seems like having one of the public schools have their baseball programs on the field probably is okay, but how do we know it's not going to be soccer next year and football the year after that? And aren't the teams going to be like 4 times the size of the private school teams that are there right now? Because the schools are 4 times the size. I mean, what's proposed for the middle school is going to have classes that are 4 times the size of any of those private schools. We already have huge amount of problems with the school buses coming through the neighborhood. We can't have more of them. We absolutely can't. Just yesterday, I was having something delivered. There was a truck out in front of my house, and the driver ended up coming and banging on my door in order to try to get the people out of there that were delivering my refrigerator because he couldn't get up the street. And that's just normal. We have all the buses from Haverford School, Haverford Friends School, and all the local buses for the kids that live in the neighborhood. And there's a lot of buses coming from the polo field already. It just doesn't work. And it'd be much better if it was a dozen vans than if it was even one more school bus, because they can access it off of County Line Road and use the polo field parking lot. Adding parking to Railroad, there's a reason why parking is restricted along Railroad Avenue. There's 2 nursing homes there. There's a number of medical facilities. And that street has become so congested over the last 23 years compared to what it was. None of this works without some sort of a traffic study. And it's one more case where Lower Merion is kind of shoving it into another township, just like with the bus barn in Conshohocken. I know you guys don't want to hear it, but that's all I have to say.
Yeah, and Bill, I appreciate that. And I think it's really important feedback. And I think it's feedback we need to share with the Lower Merion School District on how to best get kids here if this ends up being the use. And I don't disagree on the traffic study and figuring out the best way to do that. In terms of, so thank you for that. And that is well heard and certainly well received. As much as I don't love to hear it, and I would have loved to hear, yeah, we have a bus route planned and it's easy and simple. That's not the reality, and I understand that, and that has to be figured out. In terms of the question, you asked a couple of questions about the size of the teams bigger. For whatever reason, and I have some hypotheses, although not necessarily proven, the public school teams are no bigger than the private school teams. In fact, there are a lot of years that the public schools are just unable to field the team because there's not enough interest. It may not shock people that Lower Merion is not a hotbed of athletics, and we're not sending people from Lower Merion to the pros every year. So it's not, my daughter played field hockey at Welsh Valley this year. And they were the smallest team of every team. I think they had like 14 or 15 kids out of an 800-person school. It is just, for whatever reason, the schools, even though they're big schools, do not generate big athletic teams in Lower Merion. And that's how it's been. And in terms of the fear of creep and becoming a destination for soccer and football and all of that, you're absolutely right. And I think we control that, and certainly neither township wants that. I know, certainly Haverford, I know, does not want that. In Lower Merion, we don't want that either. I think, whatever agreement is come up with, that's part of it, is that this does not become a sports complex for Lower Merion schools. That's not the intention here. That's never been the intention, and that's not something I think either of the townships wants. So it's a fair concern, and it's something that we'll certainly address as we continue these dialogues.
A couple of points to follow up, Bill. One of the differences in private schools, sport is required for all students, and in public schools, that's not the case. And the bus barn the bus parking lot is actually in Lower Merion Township. It's adjacent to West Conshohocken, but it's in Lower Merion Township.
Diane Drenthal.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, and thank you all for participating in this presentation and now the Q&A. And thanks, Laura, in particular, for organizing this. I want to comment on how the increased use of the polo field for the various sports has resulted in kind of the physical condition of the field, which has led to some real stormwater runoff issues. And I think that for years, we have been talking about the need for engineering stormwater runoff as the water comes pouring down towards Railroad Avenue. And for years, in bad storms, the water, which is kind of exacerbated by the ever increasing use of the fields, comes down across Railroad, affects the properties on Railroad and on the neighboring streets, including Rugby, where I live, and Polo, and probably some others. So in the whole context of looking at use of the polo field, I think there really has to be some attention paid to the physical need for some engineering for effective stormwater control that is lacking right now and is just going to continue to get worse. If this is a field that's going to, it's a well-loved field, and I guess my point is we want to make sure that it remains useful to generations to come. And this is a sore need, I think, right now.
Thanks, Diane. I'll just say, I completely agree with what you're saying. I think a lot of the water runoff and it's only going to increase. And so as we address this, along with the other issues outside of the use of the middle school, I think that's something important to consider.
On the list, sorry.
if I could just, this may be an opportunity for, this is a suggestion just made about a need for an improvement. So I think that I don't, Andy's not going to suggest that the Lower Merion school districts, said they were going to make improvements, but they might make some. And so I think that ideas for improvements to the field from everybody on the call, I think, are welcome. And I think we'd all like to hear some thinking on that. But I know the stormwater issue you're talking about, Laura agrees. And I drove by on Railroad today with the heavy rain. There's the water was, standing water there on the field. So at the bottom of the field. So just thought it might be a good segue to what other improvements would be welcome at Polo.
Next speaker is Ellen Harvey.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for convening this. I just have one thought, and that is that as you think about the planning, you're planning this now 2 years in advance. Can you think about putting a sunset clause on it that would require a reevaluation of whether what was projected actually turned out? Because one of the challenges is we have these meetings, we're going to do this, so forth and so on, and then things change, nothing happens, and we are stuck with a situation that's not what we was said to be in the beginning. So I would just like to suggest that we put a sunset clause in it. I am a neighbor of Diane's and Doreen's and Bill's. I second what they say about parking. I second what they say on stormwater management. And this is a problem that really needs to be solved. Railroad Avenue is not wide enough to have buses parked there and have traffic go by. You have traffic coming out of the hospital. You have traffic coming out of the medical office. And it's a nightmare when there are cars lined up there, which often there are. So the parking the buses has really got to be thought through. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. And whether I think your point about evaluating things after the fact is really important, right? Because you do this plan and then that's it, and you never see it again. We see it in development projects. We see it in all kinds of things. And whether it's a sunset, whether it's an annual review process or some sort of an evaluation, I think is a very important part of this and is a wonderful suggestion.
Next on the list is Richard Brower. Richard Brower. All right, we'll move forward.
Pardon? You are? I'm sorry.
Is there a Richard there?
Yeah, I'm here. My wife is going to speak. All right.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you. I'm Mia Brower. Our home backs up to the polo field.
Next to Kathy Case.
Right next door to Kathy Case. First of all, I want to thank you all for convening this meeting 2 years in advance. I was somewhat surprised. I thought all the plans for the new middle school were made, and I thought it was wonderful. You had playing fields and buildings and everything would be state of the art. And of course, that wasn't the case. Recently, the new medical office building at 955 Haverford Road was opened. And as the previous speaker said, traffic coming out of there, especially in the afternoon, is a nightmare. You don't want to have an appointment at 3:30 in the afternoon. It takes longer to come out of that building on Railroad Avenue than if you're trying to go through the light down on Haverford Road. It's impossible. I'd also like to call attention to the odor. If you line up 5 buses and everybody wants to sit there in a nice warm school bus, or one child doesn't feel so well and wants to sit in the warm school bus, they keep them running. The police aren't going to knock on their door and say, turn off your motor. I'll never see that happen. Also, the fields on the polo field may have been increased, but at the same time, all the tennis courts, which we had up at the top end, have been eliminated. So what was there 10, 12 years ago was taken away and turned into parking spaces when the water company, I'm sorry, was under construction. We were told at the time it was temporary. They have never been rebuilt anywhere in that field. Senior citizens and approaching senior citizens also like to go, you could just go around there on Saturday afternoon and play tennis, no problem. We also have to take a look at our less financially supported private schools and have not just give them an ultimatum as of 2024, this property will now be used by Lower Merion Township. They have to know that there is something definitely available to them that is as close as the polo field is now. They can't be sent out to some playing field in Timbuktu that is hard to get to. And this is something that we have to keep in mind. So I'd like to thank you again, and I'll wait and hear what you have to say about it.
Thank you, and thank you for those comments. I think you're right, and as Donna and Brian said, that's something that, you know, as one of the next steps is working with those private schools and figuring out a solution that works for them as well. I'll leave it to somebody else to talk about the tennis courts, because I certainly can't with any knowledge talk about that either. And yeah, we have heard loud and clear traffic is an issue, and we're going to have to figure that out if this is to work. Because nobody has any intention or plans of blocking the roads and doing anything like that, and that's not a workable solution.
No one, I know that in a lot of the questions that were sent, trash and maintenance issues came up, and we only have a few more minutes. So I want to be sure if those questions are out there that you have a chance to share them. So I don't know who's next or how we would know, but.
Well, yeah, Laura, I don't have any way to tell who's going to ask about trash and other things like that. But what I will volunteer, because that's what I do, why don't you, whoever didn't have a chance to speak, and even if you did, feel free to send your written comments to me and I'll make sure to circulate them. dberman@havtwp.org, and you go to our website and find my email address there, just because I know that we're not going to get to everybody. So look, the next speaker is Kathleen Sheridan.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
This goes back to the presentation and when you were showing the field with the trees and whatnot, and that Lower Merion hasn't approved that. So is that field is not on the docket as a given, right?
Sort of, which is a terrible answer, and I know that. I apologize.
So what I'm saying is, if it's not a given, and even if it is, it might not handle all the types of field you need. What alternatives are in your radar or on your radar if you have to go elsewhere?
Yep. So alternatives that a lot have been looked at and just not workable. There are some fields, and as I said before, for multi-purpose fields in particular, there are some fields potentially in Gladwin. There's potentially the use for part of that property for, you know, not as intensive a use, not clear cutting the whole thing, but getting some of the fields in that space. There are, you know, Donna and Brian are masters of scheduling and have somehow managed to constantly, you know, put multiple teams on fields and swap home and away games. That's a possibility as well. There is a possibility, certainly, of that plan that was submitted that I showed you ends up becoming a reality. I hope that doesn't, because I think it is a really bad plan. I don't think it's very good for our township, our region, our planet. So, I won't say that that's ruled out entirely. There's potential for litigation over that plan, but it's something that nobody thinks is a good plan. I think even the school district has publicly said, we don't love the plan, but it's all we have right now. So we have and continue to look at alternative options out there. And the polo field and the reason we're here tonight is because, taking all of the positives and negatives, and there's not a perfect plan. I almost said unfortunately, but fortunately we're not in a place with tons of open space. We have 2 well-developed townships that are really wonderful townships with a ton of amenities, and there isn't a perfect solution out there. So of the solutions, where we are, the polo field, really, while it has some drawbacks and some negatives, certainly, if we can work through some of those and work them out, really is is an attractive option if it can be worked out. And again, I want to reiterate that all of these comments tonight, one, thank you for them, because it is important to hear from those who live right next to the polo field and share those comments with traffic and stormwater management and things that, those of us who use the field, and I'm certainly at those fields a decent amount of time, but I don't see what you see as a direct neighbor of it. And so having this input, it tells us what we need to work through and what problems we need to solve to see if this really is a workable solution. But as of now, if we can work through those solutions, it really is right at the top of the list with some of the other ones that we have for the multi-purpose fields.
All right. Why don't we give, unless you object, we'll go with one more question. I think we have another few minutes. So Maggie Dobbs, if you're there, please.
Hi, good evening. Thank you. So I live right on Penn Street, just about near Miller Avenue. And I just not to beat a dead horse, but just to echo all of the other concerns that were raised, primarily about traffic. So I can see the stop sign at Miller and Penn from my windows, and people routinely blow through that stop sign. And so my concern is just having additional traffic added to our roads. We have a lot of truck traffic on Penn Street already. And so just adding school buses is a concern for me. We also have a really tight corner. So coming off of Penn onto Railroad is a really tight turn. And we have some issues with traffic sight lines. There's some existing vegetation that should probably come out because it's really hard to see as you make that turn onto Railroad from Penn Street if you're turning right. And then just, again, the on-street parking, I have routinely observed people violating the no parking, kids, I'll be driving down Railroad, or I'll just be walking down Railroad and kids will just be running out of the park into the street. So that's certainly a concern from a sightline perspective, from a safety perspective. Idling vehicles is a concern. I thought the comment made by one of my neighbors about doing a sunsetting program, or at least doing some sort of evaluation of what the actual impacts, like an as-built plan for the program to understand the true impacts. I think that that's really important. And then certainly maintenance of the field. So all of the impacts that everyone has already raised, I just want to echo my concerns again, traffic especially being the primary concern, adding additional traffic, and then, not just school buses, but I anticipate potentially if parents come to pick up kids at the end of their practice, at the end of the day, not only they're going to be shuttled in, but potentially then also picked up by their parents. And so then that's additional traffic. And the intersection again at County Line and Railroad, people, it's a 5-point intersection. It's, additional traffic with the new medical center. And so I routinely get blocked. I will be coming home. So coming off of Bryn Mawr Avenue onto Railroad Avenue and trying to cross over that intersection there, and people will just pull into the intersection and completely block it. So, any sort of mitigation measures that we can take to ensure that traffic safety is maintained for the health of our community and the safety of our residents. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. And I just want to thank everybody. Really, this having this feedback, obviously, as somebody said, I know you don't want to hear this. We really do. I wish we did have a solution that was a perfect solution and we didn't have to hear this. But the reason we're here tonight is because we did want to hear this, and we do want to hear this. And I hope those who didn't get a chance to make comments, or anyone who did and wants to elaborate more, does submit them and submits them to Dave. And Dave, thank you for volunteering to take all those comments and get them out to all of us. I mean, these are the things, and when we take on this role of commissioner, our job is to look at solving problems that can help the community. And certainly that's the role I want to take here and come up with a solution that really works. And having this feedback is very helpful. So I want to very much thank Laura, Dave, Brian, for all the organizing this and kind of being great partners, and Eileen as well. Sorry, you were muted, so I left you out there. Sorry about that, Eileen. But thank you for being wonderful partners in this and really inviting us to have this conversation with your residents. And I hope we, over the coming months are able to figure out solutions and come up with something that works for everybody. So just really want to thank everyone involved and who was on this call.
I echo what Andy said. I also want to thank Donna Heller, from Lower Merion Parks Director, for being on the call, as well as our manager, Ernie McNeely. And, a shout out to Laura Cavender, who is just, very dedicated to putting this together and listening. And I think this has been a very productive session.
I echo what Andy and Scott had to say. Thank you. I find this really useful to just get everything out on the table and we can consider our options. I think a lot of things have changed in the neighborhood. I heard that. I think traffic's a concern. There are bigger issues we need to deal with. But as far as this particular problem, I think this was a good start at understanding what some of the issues might be. So again, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dave Berman. Thank you, Brian Barrett. And thank you, Eileen Matola, for coming. And thanks for everybody from Lower Merion as well.
Laura, can I ask a question that was not raised tonight? And I don't want to put you and the other commissioners on the spot, but I think the residents would want to know when do you think they'll hear something more? Is that
go? Andy, why don't you start with that?
I was hoping you were going to take that one. I don't think there is a set time, but this is something that there is a sense of urgency while it's 2 years out. Like I said earlier, we don't want to get to a point where we're, in March of 2024 or December of 2023 and figuring this out. So we're going to be continuing to work on this. I wish I had a better answer than, as soon as we can, but this is something that I know we're working on coming out of this meeting and continuing to work on in the coming months. So hopefully, we're talking in the next couple of months.
And Andy, are you then going to take this back to the school board and have a conversation with them? Is that what needs to happen next? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry to put you on the spot, Andy, but I know I was going to get asked and I don't have an answer.
Yeah, no, it's a very fair question, and we need to continue the conversations between us and with the school board involved as well, to see how we can make this happen if it makes sense.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Great, thank you.
Thank you all. Take care. Have a good night.
Good night.
Thanks, everybody.